Any of you knows Keith, you know this is my one opportunity to really roast him like he would probably do to me if the tables were turned. But as they say, discretion is the better part of valor, so I'm going to hold back because I know it'd come back at me sooner or later. But on a more serious note, Barb and I have known Keith and Jody for 26 years, hard to believe that. And along that time, we have walked alongside of Keith and Jody through the good times, the bad times. We've learned that his bark is worse than his bite. Below that disciplined correction officer exterior beats a very tender heart that loves Christ, loves his family, and loves you people as well. Done more at Kish than any of you knows. His fingerprints are all over everything from top to bottom. Gone through many times with Keith, and he's also gone through many times with me. I've gone to him for counsel and advice, and he's given me more wisdom about life than he would give himself credit for. I believe he's earned the right to be listened to, so I hope you will pay close attention to my brother and friend, Keith Cram. Would you give him a hand as he comes forward?
Okay, that's to hold my water if I need to sit down. Intro to Keith, I don't need that. Okay, well, I see a lot of faces in here this morning that I've never seen before, so not that adds to the nerves. Pastor Doug asked me what I wanted the standees behind today, whether his glass table or one of the stands. And I said, no, I wanted something big and wooden that I could hold on to, and then you can't see my legs shaking out back there. Anyhow, Pastor Doug said, my name is Keith Cram. Some of you know me as the large guy who just takes attendance every week. I want to share with you today about my journey. I was going to speak from the heart without any notes, but I didn't want to miss or forget anything. I also tend to speak without a filter, so writing all this down seemed like a safer option. Pastor Doug also feels safer knowing that he shouldn't have to do any damage control when this is all over, because that's happened before. I've stood here during the building process. We had no air conditioner for 2 weeks, and even though we had warned folks that there was going to be no air conditioner, how do you function without air conditioning? But there were some complaints fielded my way, and I got tired of it, so I just came up here and gave a little encouraging speech. And at the end, I said, you got two options: stay at home or suck it up and deal with it. That was probably round 10 of the damage control. Anyhow, I'm not a preacher. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. My delivery's not going to be as polished as it would be as like you're used to Pastor Doug with 35 years standing up here leading us. I may read too much and not look up enough, but I ask that you bear with me. Please pay attention to the information, not the delivery. This is very important stuff. February the 18th, 2012. It's the worst day of my life. I was sitting at the Lewistown Geisinger Health Clinic with my wife Jody and Pastor Doug. I'd had very little to eat or sleep in the last 3 weeks. Sleep deprivation really lets your mind play with you. You just start worrying and thinking about things that you normally wouldn't think about. I was rocking back and forth sitting in my chair. I was consumed with anxiety. When I finally got to the doctor, I was fully convinced I was having a heart attack, something I'd experienced many times before, because the physical ailment that I had often mimics a heart attack. My esophagus was in bad shape. The doctor said I was not having a heart attack, but a panic attack. I was severely depressed and in a full-blown panic attack. But I wasn't listening. I demanded an EKG, because when I went to medical school, I knew I was having a heart attack. But he did give me the EKG. The EKG did show that it wasn't normal, but I wasn't having a heart attack. It was just that I was that big of a train wreck at the time. The EKG wasn't normal, but I was physically fine, mentally not so good. He prescribed anxiety medication, depression medication, and suggested that I remove all my guns from my house. I never really felt suicidal, but I did want what I was going through to end. I had made the judgment a week prior to this to remove all the weapons from my house. I already made that decision. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew something was terribly wrong. And for those of you that know me, taking all the guns out of my house is not a 10-minute job. I'm well stocked. Say, well, what got me to that point? How did I get to that point in my life? I never knew what it was called, but my mind was always racing. I was always anxious. I went through periods in my life of dark mood. My mind never stops. If I'm reading a book or watching TV, I can never focus on what's going on the show or in the book. My mind is always trying to solve a problem or two or whatever, somebody else's problem, my problems. And that's another reason why sleep can be so fleeting. If you lay down and your mind just won't shut off, it just continues to spin. A lot of times I can fall asleep just fine, but I wake up an hour or two later and I'm done. And I know I'm done. And I used to just get so worked up about I need to have X amount of sleep. I look at the clock, I need this much sleep, I need this much sleep. And I've come to understand you can go a long time on a little bit of sleep if you just don't freak out about it, like last night. I went to bed at 10 o'clock and I fell right asleep. 12:30. 3 o'clock this morning I was still making changes to this. I did fall back asleep. I don't have any idea what time how much sleep I did end up getting, but it doesn't matter. Some of my backstory. I grew up in a home that was not full of love. My parents split when I was 5 years old because my father was having his first affair. The first memory I have is sitting on the steps of my house, listening to my father with his girlfriend sitting beside him, telling my mother that he didn't love her. They eventually reconciled, but it was never real. Any disobedience on my part as a child was met with violence and anger. The only love I ever felt that was unconditional to me was from my grandmother. It always seemed like my parents had their own agenda, and it never really included my brother and sister. Don't get me wrong, I was never cold, I was never hungry, but I just didn't feel that love. I became a Christian in this church in 1976 when we were down in that little storefront in Milroy. We were watching The Thief in the Night movie. Those of you who are old enough to remember that movie series, it would scare you to salvation. It was about what it amounted to. When that little girl was walking home from the store and dropped the butter, if you can remember that one, she dropped her butter on the sidewalk and it started to melt. I was knocking people over to get up front. But I always viewed God just like my father, just waiting for me to get out of line so he could knock me around. That's been my view of what God was until recently. I combated all that negativity in my life with perfectionism, and that's something I still fight with. If you hire me to do wiring in your house, you know one thing. The screws on all the cover plates are going to be the same direction. And my kids will come to our house when we're not home, and they'll move them. He comes in, moves the covers, and I'm like, oh. So that's paybacks to that. Anyhow, so whether it was sports or grades, always driven to offset what I was missing with straight A's or being the best athlete that I could possibly be. And even though I played baseball, football, cross country, basketball, track, I can count on one hand the events that either of my parents ever saw. And that's one thing I vowed as a father that I would change. I joined the military in 1983. My parents were now separated again. My father was out of work. There was no way I could ever afford to go to school to be an electrical engineer. That was always my goal. The Marine Corps took my already perfectionist attitude and thinking to a whole new level. Finally, there was a place where everything was black and white. There was no gray. I thrived in that environment. Strict rules and guidelines, but it only made me a harder person. My oldest son, Daniel, was born when I was overseas serving. I never saw him until he was 6 months old. And that was before Al Gore had invented the internet. There was no Skype. There was no emailing pictures. There was none of that. Sort of like how Ken and Kim live now. The settlers said, no technology. Anyhow, I waited 30 days to see pictures of my son, and the pictures had to come through the regular mail. And they were Polaroid pictures, not so great. The Red Cross called me. My mother-in-law called me and said, you have a son. His name is Daniel. And the Red Cross called me 3 days later and said, you have a daughter. And her name is Danielle. I said, somebody's got some wires crossed, guys. I've already spoken to my wife, and I'm pretty sure it's a dude, you know. All right, so being away from your family and not seeing your children until they're a certain age, that's something that military personnel go through all the time, so that's not a predicament that was strange to me. I controlled everything in my life with overbearing dominance. I used my size to try to intimidate people. I used my type A personality to try to intimidate people. It's things that my father in the Marine Corps had driven deep within me. The dominance and force of will had carried me this far. But that was all about to change. Many years later, I had been struggling, as I shared earlier, with acid reflux for 15 years. It was not controlled by lifestyle or diet changes. Medication was not effective. I continued losing weight, but I refused to give up bicycling. Bicycling was my outlet, and I knew it. I didn't want to give it up. I was riding 5,000 miles a year on a bicycle. A lot of them with Darrell. I was very bitter at the doctor and at Jody when they finally took the bike away from me. It was Jody's idea. She was tired of watching me come home from rides and sitting and almost passing out and always being dizzy because I wasn't eating enough to offset the energy that I was expending on the bike. I was skinny, had no body fat. That's obviously changed. I can now eat, and I take advantage of it. My doctor decided that I needed surgery. At the time, that was my 8th. I've had more since, but that was my 8th surgery at the time, to stop the damage to my esophagus. And the damage is called Barrett's esophagus, and that's the beginning of throat cancer. And it often mimics a heart attack, so that's why I had spent so much time convinced that it was my heart, because this is not the first time that I was convinced it was my heart. The surgery is pretty complex, and my overnight stay turned into 3 days after complications that included a collapsed lung. After being discharged, I continued to have the chest pains from the collapsed lung, and the damage to my esophagus hadn't healed yet. Neither of these points were well explained to me when I was discharged. I was on a liquid diet for 2 weeks. I I was allowed to try soft foods. Well, my soft food of choice when I was allowed to start eating was scrambled eggs. The eggs got stuck. I couldn't swallow them. I couldn't bring them back up. I freaked. I flipped out. I was trying to get it out. I couldn't get it out. I couldn't swallow it down. A side effect of the surgery is I will never be able to throw up again. And for me, that fact was horrible. There's something you need to understand. My entire life, I used throwing up as a stress outlet. I didn't really understand it, but I just knew that when I was really stressed, I would be sick in the stomach, and then I would throw up, and I would feel better. The relief was only temporary, but it was still better than nothing. But that relief was now gone. It's not as self-destructive as cutting or substance abuse that I later also struggled with, but that was my release. And that was gone. That was a big deal. That outlet was no longer there. So I refused to eat anything solid. Then I became afraid to eat. I wouldn't eat anything solid. I continued to lose weight. I was 6'5", 158 pounds. I was going to put the picture, I took a picture of myself. I was going to put that up there. But I didn't have a shirt on. I don't want to scare anybody. Just imagine, you know, I wasn't as bad as like the horror pictures you see about the prisoner of war. But I was really thin. I weigh 240 pounds today. So take 80 pounds off of me. I was a bag of bones. Oftentimes, Jody would force me to eat. She would feed me, spoon feed me applesauce like I was a child. But I was acting like a child. I mean, I refused to eat anything solid, and she knew that I had to have something, and she would force me to eat. The anxiety got worse, and I ended up at the doc's appointment that I started this story with. When I left the doc's appointment, I had what I refused to do my entire life, and especially since my surgery, and that was to take medication to help with depression and anxiety. I'd always put a stigma on that type of medication, and now I was on. After 2 weeks, I had to see a psychiatrist because my health insurance doesn't cover mental health. They have another outlet, so you can't go to your regular doctor for mental health issues. You have to go see a psychiatrist. And a lot of you can chuckle because you're thinking, hey, you should have been to the psychiatrist a long time ago. When I got to the psychiatrist, he changed my medication. The medication that the doctor at Geisinger put me on was like a rescue medication, something that you can't stay on long term. But I didn't get that no either. So when they changed my medication, then I went down a rabbit hole again. I started to spiral because it takes time for the medicine to adjust in your system. During that spiral downwards, Jody and I went to a Cram concert. I had bought her tickets for this concert. It was in Hershey. We went down and spent the night. It was supposed to be romantic, yada, yada, yada. But I was a wreck. So we went to this Cram concert, and I was having a horrible time. So we had the tickets. We didn't want to give them up. So we went. I just sat at the concert with my head in my hands. I wasn't paying attention to anything that was going on until the song by Matthew West was played. There was no way to describe what was going on in my head. And then this song, Larry's going to sing that now.
You must think I'm strong to give me what I'm going through. Forgive me if I'm wrong. It looks like more than I can do on my own. I know I'm not strong enough to be everything that I'm supposed to be. I give up strong enough. Hands of mercy, won't you cover me, Lord? Right now I'm asking you to be strong enough. Strong enough for the both of us. Maybe that's the point. Reach the point of giving up. When I finally at rock bottom, that's when I start looking up, reaching out. I know I'm not strong enough to be everything that I'm supposed to be. I give up. I'm not strong enough. Hands of mercy, won't you cover me, Lord? Right now I'm asking you to be strong enough. Strong enough. 'Cause I'm broken, down to nothing. Love still holding on to the one thing. You are guiding, you are showing. I am weak. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I don't have to be strong enough, strong enough. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I don't have to be, I don't have to be strong enough, strong enough. I know I'm not strong enough to be everything that I'm supposed to be. I give up. Not strong enough. Hands of mercy, won't you cover me, Lord? Right now I'm asking you to be strong enough. Strong enough. Strong enough. Strong enough.
Thanks, guys. When I heard that song, I didn't even know who Matthew West was. I went to the Crum for casting crowns. Nothing else. The song gave me some hope. Later that week, Jody had a family gathering to cheer me up. It didn't help. There was too much going on. It was loud. People were playing games. Everyone was directing all their attention at the crazy guy. And I couldn't take it. It was just too much for me. So I left the party, went upstairs to be alone. I ended up lying on my living room floor, crying. I just didn't know what else to do. I was crying out to God. I finally surrendered any perceived control of my life at that moment to God. That's a huge turning point in my life. In the days, weeks, and years to follow, it has been so freeing to come to that point. I still struggle with this, and it's a daily effort for me to let go and let God. Until that point, I always got my identity and security in myself, not Christ. Even though I thought I did. I thought I got my security from Christ. I didn't. And I also still struggle with that, to remain tentative to keep that truth. My identity was based on working 2 jobs, extreme exercise, trying to control everything by my willpower. When we first came back to this church in 1991, I was raised in this church. We started in Richard and Carrie's basement. But my parents left when they had marital problems. I don't know how many times it was, but we left and went to Calvary Bible. And when I came back out of the military, my wife and I went to the church with my mother, and it was a dead church. We want to raise our kids there, so we came back here. I had a bumper sticker on my truck, and it said, "God is my co-pilot." And I was proud of that bumper sticker. God is my co-pilot. And Pastor Doug said, "You got it all wrong. How arrogant was I to think that God was my co-pilot? He's not anybody's co-pilot. God doesn't play second fiddle. He's not a co-pilot." For me, one of my big things was I was trying to compare my struggles at the time with the struggles of others that I knew were having in our church. Ken Walters was fighting cancer. Ken, anything you want to say? No? Good. Kenny's really shy. And Celeste Reese was fighting cancer. Her teenage daughter was pregnant. And her son Lucas was a combat Marine who was injured. So I thought, my stomach hurts. Celeste sat up here with a bandana on her head and spoke to us with such meaning. I thought, this girl's got it going on. I was comparing myself to the folks that I knew that were struggling but keeping their head above water. You have to keep your struggles separate. It's not how you perceive other people's struggles. It's what's going on in your life. Your struggle with depression and anxiety may be much less or much more than mine. I know lots of my friends here have had terrible childhoods that made mine look like, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. But it's what you perceive your own struggles to be. So it doesn't matter how you got there. What matters now is, what do you do? What do you do now once you reach that point? Those who tell you to suck it up, just trust God because you're weak, they probably don't have their own issues worked out. They may mean well, but they do more damage in the long run. There's been a lot of negative talk about medication since Pastor Jim's suicide. Medication can simply help stop the spinning of your world until you can focus on the spiritual truths. Satan can and will use your struggle and attempt to hide the truths of God's Word. Medication is used to treat many ailments. Why can't Christians understand there's a place for medication when you're battling mental struggles? I still take the medication, and I feel the best that I ever had. But you just can't take the medication alone. It's not a crutch. You have to take that medication so you can focus on God's truth and process that truth. Other things that help me through this, scripture. I have scripture that's so far down on the list of things because until I had the medication, I couldn't focus on the scripture. So I needed that to stop my world from spinning. So the scripture's up there. Okay, this is one I've always leaned on, even before my trouble. This is Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. 2 Corinthians 12:9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest in me. Isaiah 40:31. But those in the hope of the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. That verse means so much to me that Jody, when we go camping, she took a picture of a bald eagle and had the bald eagle framed and had that verse put on it. We have that hanging in our house. things that you can use to help you through your struggles are the people in your life. Outside of my salvation, my wife Jody is the absolute best thing that ever happened to me. We would soon be married 33 years. She helped with our kids when I was an idiot. My parenting style was different than hers. She was the one to help rein me in. She's so perceptive when things are off in my life, off kilter. She can sometimes even pick up on it before I realize it. And she is the real rock in our relationship. She is the one who I hook my anchor to as far as earthly people. Pastor Doug, he's a great man of wisdom and a great friend, but after a few sessions, he knew I was too far gone for him to help, and I needed a dedicated counselor. He suggested Dr. James Brady. Dr. Brady is not a pushy counselor. He lets you talk. He lets you get it out. He'll nudge you in the correct direction when you need it, and he supports everything he says with Scripture. The psychiatrist I see now, just a pill dispenser. That's all he is. It's that simple. The appointments take no more than 10 minutes every 90 days. That's why the counseling is so important. If you're going to a secular psychiatrist who just wants to throw pills at you, he's not interested in your spiritual recovery from this. So you need to get dedicated counselor, especially when things are still spinning. So you can get the ship right and you need somebody to help you calm things down. People in your life. Jim and Kara Wagner. They never let up as friends. They knew I was struggling, but they never, ever preached at me or talked down to me. They went on vacation to Florida to watch the Daytona 500. They call me daily. From their vacation, they call me every time. They would come by the house and visit, or just call us over to their house just to hang out. No pressure, just hang out. I will never forget that. Just the presence of friends can keep your mind occupied, and it did wonders for my emotional health. Joe and Wendy Bonson, other members of our cell group, they checked in. That's the importance of small groups in this church. Because you come to a service like this and you get fed, but there's no relationship in it. I'm not going to stop and talk to Karen, and she's not going to tell me what's going on in her life. But in small groups, you have that opportunity. You get to know other people intimately. When you're struggling, they can rally the wagons and they can get around you. So if you're not involved in a small group, I encourage you to try that. Denny Yawn. Other than Pastor Doug, as far as earthly men go, Denny Yawn's the best man I know. During the worst part of my struggle, when I felt like God had abandoned me, my prayers were bouncing back to me. I didn't feel like God was listening. I get a phone call from Denny. He and his wife Jane were in Florida, and Denny likes to dabble in electrical work. So he called me to ask me a question about some electrical work in a house that they were renting in Florida. He had no earthly idea at the time what was going on in my life. But I'm convinced God prompted him to call me. The questions he asked me at the time were the same that he'd asked me before. I'm sure he knew the answer. While we talked electrical, he said to me, "It doesn't sound like you're okay." And he asked what was going on in my life. I gave him the entire story to that point. He talked to me on the phone over an hour, pouring God's truth into my life. His own wife, Jane, struggles with depression and anxiety. She's allowed me to mention that here. So Denny was experienced at helping folks out that struggle with this. When they came back from Florida, they came by for a visit, and it meant so much to hear Jane just open up to me and explain to me her struggles. So I didn't feel like that I was by myself. He was the perfect person for me to talk to. And I actually finally said to Jody after I got off that phone call, I think God's now listening to me. You just never know you reach out to somebody, how just a simple phone call, if you follow God's prompting, how that simple phone call changed my life. Right now, Denny suffered, he had a stroke. He can't communicate well. I've never understood that. Denny, I work in a prison. Denny worked in the same prison. And he was always walking around the prison, and guys would say to Denny, whatever you're on, I need some of whatever you're on. And Denny said, I'm on Jesus. That's what I'm on. He was always so upbeat and talked the whole way to work. I'm trying to catch a nap, and Denny's... But he always had something important to say. Everybody listened to him. He can't communicate that well. I've never understood that. Now I really enjoy laughing and cutting up, picking on, or generally harassing almost anybody in my life. If I see something out of the ordinary, you're getting it. Steve Huggendover, now Joe Ugetto has started. They wear slippers to class. They tell me their shoes, they're slippers. Darren Yoder for being the human chia pet. Jim Powell, anything Dallas Cowboys. He's got a tattoo of Dallas Cowboys on his calf. He's always trying to wear Kellers for Dallas Cowboys, and I don't let him get away with it. Tim Freimeyer for anything. Tim can breathe, and I'm on. But he makes up his own words. He's got his own vocabulary. He just makes up words. Pastor Doug, if it has anything to do with driving or shenanigans in general, I like to call him out on it. I also now enjoy the hug and howdy or the greeting time every Sunday. I used to dread it. Now I look forward to it. I seek out friends and family to hug. Shirley McCalvey, Becky Zimmerman, Fran Schur, Patty Everly, Jen Caldwell, Deb Yoder, Lizzie Treaster, because she does not like it. She does not like it, and I hunt her out. Barb Saban, Jas Foltz, Kara Wagner. If Kara has to bolt, if she's downstairs teaching and they leave and I don't get a hug that week, I'm texting her. You owe me 2 for next week. I need that connection. I hug men too, if you get it within arm's reach. I enjoy life now, instead of being so bitter and mean. I do, however, prefer to still be direct. I don't shy away from controversy, but I go about it a different way. I take 1 weekend a month. Jody and I go away. We go camping, something I would never have done before. She asked me when I was in my recovery if I would do that, and we did, and we've gone a little bit overboard, but it gives you time to charge your batteries. Christian music. I can't tell you how much Christian music plays a part of my life. I just surround myself with Christian music, especially this last week. I mean, I've had it on my phone. I've had it on in my office at work, just everything. So, what are the benefits to me from this struggle? To get my own life in order. I wasn't basing my identity on Christ. I raised my kids better than I was raised, but still anger was a large part of their discipline. I've gone to both of my kids, asked for forgiveness, and admitted to them that I failed them in this area and to forgive me. To help other people that are struggling. I've been able to talk to a lot of people in this church. Some of you, I'm not going to mention your names. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of all compassion, and the God of all comfort. So we can help others out that are going through their own struggles. Right at the end of my struggle, my sister Julie was diagnosed with breast cancer. And after having just gone through that with Celeste, that was pretty raw. I was able to help out my sister with scripture, and just knowing what helped me was just being there, just listening, just giving her a sounding board. Bring mental health issues out of the darkness in the church. That's Christians don't want to admit that. It's a taboo thing. We don't want to talk about mental health struggles. If you suffer, you're not alone. Say that again. If you're in this church and you suffer, you are not alone. In a church this size, I'm sure there's many folks who suffer in one form or another. While the statistics are mixed, it does appear that there was more women than men that suffer with depression and anxiety. So I am in touch with my feminine side. Once you go through it, you can pick it out in other people. You can notice when other people are struggling. You can look at them and you can see either on their face or their body something. I don't know what it is, but I can now pick folks out that are struggling with this. On the downside of the men and the women in statistics, men, however, are more likely to commit suicide. I know of at least 6 families in this church who've had been affected directly by suicide in their immediate family. This entire church is still reeling from the suicide of Pastor Jim. It doesn't make sense to any of us, but we're all still trying to work through that. This month, September, is that up? September is Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. If you're here today and you have any thoughts, talk to somebody. Talk to one of us. Call that hotline. Well, I opened my phone up and I asked Siri for the National Suicide Hotline phone number. Siri wouldn't let me alone. She kept saying, "I'll call it for you." And you have to click a button to get out of it to make sure that you don't want to dial the hotline. So, some genius at Apple figured out that if somebody asked for that number, they may need it. So they didn't want to let you out of that page without acknowledging that you don't want to call. It's a time of testing and building if you submit to God and allow Him to work in your life. Even though at the time you don't understand why or what you're going through. Will you put up the next verse, please? Hebrews. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and a peace for those who have been trained by it. This little, it's a mini-zine, not a magazine. It's by Mathis Ministries. It's a great little book. It helps you with the do's and don'ts of helping somebody with depression. Do I have the slide for that? Don't. When someone is really downcast, exhortations are a waste of time. There's nothing in the tank. There's no willpower to exert. There's no courage to screw up so that they can just get over it. Depending on how bad you are, you're just trying to breathe. You don't even know what, you can't even think 5 minutes ahead. You're just focusing right now. And the do's. Be present. Just spend time with those folks. Be with them. And if there's a part of their burden that you can help carry to help lift their struggles, that would be the time to do it. And then the last thing is the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter. I don't know his last name. You can figure it out for yourself. A lot of us in this church have read that book. Some of us have used it as a small group. It's got a lot of good things in there to help you focus on your depression and anxiety. And that's all I have. I just want you to understand if you're here and you're struggling, you don't have to do it alone. It doesn't mean I'm going to come to your house at 3 o'clock in the morning, but if you ask me for help, I'm going to help you. I'm going to get you the right people to talk to, the right counselors, and just know that even though we're Christians and we think we have it all figured out, it may not be true. And you may be at any age in your life and think, I've never struggled with it. I don't have to worry about it. I work in a prison where I see people with mental illness every day, and I used to make fun of them. I made fun of those people. Crazy. Yeah, well, now I'm one of them. I'm crazy, but it's a good crazy, and I've learned a lot from it, and you can too. It's not an empty pit. You can get out of it.
been affected by this in some way or another. So listen to those words and do something. Would you pray with me? Father, I pray for that person that might be here today that is struggling in the darkness.